Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of our Way Forward Workshop Leader Lunch Break. Well, the intro music was clearly Irish, and we acknowledge St. Patrick's Day. We also acknowledge our Jewish brothers and sisters who are celebrating the Feast of Purim. So it was 2 years ago this week that our worlds were turned upside down as the reality of COVID-19, and of course a dog, washed into our lives and changed how we live. It has been a tumultuous journey. At Cleveland Leadership Center, we believed that it was important to mark this 2-year anniversary of the pandemic. We believed it important to acknowledge how far we have come. We wanted our nod to this milestone to generate hope, admiration for the resiliency shown by so many, a recognition of the suffering endured, and profound gratitude for the courage manifest from so many individuals. It was courage that saw us to this point in time, and it is more courage that's going to guide us into the future. As we've thought about who could best represent how leadership was summoned over these past 2 years, we thought of one person. That person's Dr. Amy Acton. Time magazine called her collective calm amid calamity. The New York Times called her the leader we wish we all had. The John F. Kennedy Presidential Library said that she embodies strength, truth, humility, and heart. Little girls across America and across Ohio donned capes to fight COVID, as Dr. Acton was their superhero, the strong woman that they aspired to be. To many of us who at that time were struggling with finding our capes and our emotions, she was that steady, encouraging voice at 2 p.m. every day whose advice guided our actions and quieted our fears. This was not a spot in the limelight that Dr. Acton ever envisioned, nor was it one that she sought, but it was one in which she shone brightly. Dr. Acton is a physician trained in preventive health and public medicine with more than 30 years of experience in medicine, public service, teaching, philanthropy, and advocacy. When she was tapped in 2019 by Governor DeWine to serve as director of the Ohio Department of Health, COVID-19 wasn't on the horizon. She assumed her role determined to make a difference through addressing the social determinants of health, advocating for health equity, inclusion, and opportunity, addressing the environmental crisis and algae blooms, establishing an endowment for the state opioid settlement to address addiction, and elevating the plague of youth homelessness, to name just a few of the issues on her agenda, issues which she addressed during her tenure. When COVID struck, her leadership journey accelerated, and she found herself quoted, imitated, and yes, criticized. Her leadership models the resilience and the strength that we all seek, and she continues to inspire us today. Her awards are numerous. I'm just going to highlight a few. The John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award, the American Red Cross Humanitarian of the Year, the John Glenn College of Public Affairs Outstanding Public Service Award, the Martin Luther King Humanitarian Award, the Powerful Voice Award, and so many more. We look to her words today to challenge us and to equip us to be stronger leaders. Before I turn it over to Dr. Acton, I invite you to step back in time to those early days of the pandemic and watch this short clip from the New York Times entitled, "The Leader We Wish We All Had."
This is no small thing that we are doing together. It is so incredibly hard to have shut down our lives the way we have. I am absolutely certain you will look back and know that you helped save each other.
This is Dr. Amy Acton, Director of the Ohio Department of Health. Trademark lab coat, emphatic hand gestures, and a knack for metaphors.
It's like Swiss cheese. So I want you to picture a hurricane. When you have a fire on your stove and you have your kitchen extinguisher, you want to get it quick.
You may not have seen her press briefings, but in Ohio, they've become a daily ritual, catapulting her from unknown local official to cult icon.
Hi, my name is Amy Acton. Any questions? Dr. Amy's going to help us find out the coronavirus.
In her youth, Dr. Acton overcame neglect and homelessness, on her way to being crowned homecoming queen. And last year, she became the first woman appointed to run Ohio's health department. Under her, Ohio has become a leader in responding to COVID. It declared a state of emergency with just 3 confirmed cases. And it was the first state to shut down schools. Later that same week, some governors were still proudly eating in packed restaurants. And Dr. Acton issued a stay-at-home order affecting more than 11 million people when the death toll was still just 3. So how did Dr. Acton do it? To find out, we watched more than 7 weeks of press briefings, and we noticed themes that, well, let's just say other leaders should pay attention to. First up, she empowers us. Take a look at this clip from the day Dr. Acton issued that stay-at-home order.
I don't want you to be afraid. I am not afraid. I am determined. But I need you to do everything. I want you to think about the fact that this is our one shot in this country. All of us are going to have to sacrifice. And I know someday we'll be looking back and wondering, what was it we did in this moment?
Of her 65 words there, 12 are pronouns. Her repeated use of I tells us she's in it with us. She's taking ownership. Her use of you makes the audience feel a connection with her, even though we're watching from home. Toward the end, she switches from singular to collective pronouns, signaling that she's just like us. And we're in it together. She's in charge, yet she's made us feel like the heroes.
There are everyday heroes everywhere. We know that not all heroes wear capes. Home and watch your neighbor who's a nurse's child. I know you're all done those capes in big ways and small ways. Please, thank you.
Ohioans were inspired, not just to stay at home, but to spread her messages to each other. Another theme of Dr. Acton's briefings is brutal honesty. And to understand this one, we have to take you back to mid-April. People were getting restless, wondering when things would get back to normal.
So I do hope no one at home thinks like it's wide open May 1st, going back to life as normal. The rules have changed and they're not going to be quite the same. Life will be different for quite some time to come, and maybe in some ways that are permanent.
She's preparing us for the long haul, even if it's not what we want to hear.
It's really hard to hear that, but we are not going back to 6 months ago. That's not the reality we all face.
This is something she does a lot, actually, setting up bad news with a warning.
Ohioans, I know that's hard to take. I know that's a hard truth for people because we want there to be a right way. And I know this is a deep breath we all must take.
Dr. Acton's also honest about what she doesn't know.
We have to be very clear and transparent with you. Yet.
A lot of leaders repeatedly says,
we don't know.
It's actually calming to hear her admit what we all feel deep down, that we just don't have the full story. And finally, Dr. Acton sees vulnerability as a strength. After watching dozens of hours of briefings, there was one word we kept hearing over and over.
Please just acknowledge and give a name to what you're going through. Acknowledge it with each other. And so I just want to acknowledge that these are still really tough times. This is wearing on all of us, and I just want to acknowledge that. I just want to acknowledge that all of us are feeling this. It's such an unprecedented time.
Hearing Dr. Acton acknowledge our harder emotions forces us to face them head on. Stuffing down fear and sadness just causes more stress and may make us act more selfishly, instead of empathizing with each other.
You'll have days when you're anxious, but don't kill yourself over that. Please know and forgive yourself and try again.
And take a look at what she does here.
Every day I go through stages of grief. I go through, denial. I go through a little anger. I go through a little bargaining. I don't have to wear this. I might not need it. This isn't true. I get a little down.
When she tells us she's struggling too, we feel seen and heard and less alone. And maybe that's all any of us want right now. In a pandemic, the words our leaders choose can save lives. As of the end of April, Ohio had recorded fewer than 1,000 COVID deaths. By comparison, neighboring Michigan suffered more than 3,000, even though Ohio has a bigger population and had its first case 3 weeks earlier. Of course, other factors help explain this. But Dr. Acton convinced millions of Ohioans to stay at home, not by ordering them, but by inspiring them.
People at home, you are moving mountains. You are saving lives. Again, I get emotional talking about this because this is no small thing that we are doing together. It is so incredibly hard to have shut down our lives the way we have. I am absolutely certain you will look back and know that you helped save each other in this state. The impact is profound. Please at home, don't stop.
We're thrilled to welcome Dr. Amy Acton.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Good. Hi. It's so wonderful to be with you, Cleveland. I know I have Columbus. You don't see the skyline back here. But you all probably know I'm a Northeast Ohio girl at heart. Grew up in Youngstown and have a very big attachment to Cleveland. So hello, everyone. I have to say it makes me a little bit emotional to see that video again, because it puts us all right back there. I'm looking around to some folks sitting here too. And I have to say it is no small thing that we've made it to this point together. And I don't think there's anyone who's gone untouched by what we've been through. And I also think we're going to be a lot better for it. And I'd like to explain to you why I think that. But we're here in a studio in Columbus, WBNS. So grateful. I guess I'm the first person they've been able to have in. So, we're entering a brave new world now. And it isn't over. I can tell you, I used a metaphor very early on of a dimmer switch, like a light switch. I wish that one had caught, because I have to keep saying that to myself. I like dimmer switches versus on-off switches, because they actually do have a lot of control in them. Like, it's nuanced, and so much of the world we live in is that, isn't it? So, but we are emerging, but not all of us are going to emerge in the same way. We're not going to emerge at the same time. Some of us are more at risk than others. And I think this is another phase that we have to be very intentional about, and have a lot of mercy and grace for one another. We have to actually choose to weave us back together again. And I say all this saying, I'm watching everything happening in Ukraine as well. Interestingly, a lot of what we're experiencing now was predicted, and I see these things as related. So I will share that with you. But first of all, it was an honor of a lifetime to serve in this capacity. And very early on, I'm going to give you some behind the scenes, if that's okay, some behind the scenes look at stuff. I hope to do more over time. But very early on, in that very first month, I was approached by Ryan Vessler, who's the owner of Homage. It's a really wonderful t-shirt and apparel company. And he said to me, "You're trending." And anyone who's noticed, I have quite like 50-some thousand Twitter followers, and I don't tweet. I've never tweeted. So that, this was a little lost on Geezer Leamy. But, he said, we really want to do this t-shirt for charity. We know you care about youth homelessness. And what I said to him then was, "You're going to know me for about a month." I thought it would be about a month. But before this pandemic is over, it is going to be this baton marathon pass off, where, and we've seen that it's just been so true. There's not a school board, superintendent, anybody who has not had to lead in unique ways, whatever business you're in. And so that's when he came up with the "Not All Heroes Wear Capes." And that went viral, and that became sort of this expression of Ohioans. And so I've got to say that to you, there are no orders or mandates that would have ever been able to legislate what we were going to have to learn and grow together. Those were the emergency breaks. They're part of a pandemic playbook that George W. Bush created after 9/11, when he realized that one of the gravest security risks to this country
was a pandemic or a biologic weapon. And it was worse than the virus itself, as if that wasn't bad enough. It was the unmooring and untethering, the ambiguity that we would all have to tolerate, that makes it so dangerous, and that there would be unrest, that there would be supply chain shortages, that people, bad actors would take advantage of the world being disrupted, all of which is true. So embarking on that, that's what we were looking at. The mortality rate, now looking back, was around 25% in March. By June, it was about 5% in some of the statistics I've seen thus far. And so we were really having to throw those emergency brakes. But Ohioans flattened the curve. You know, it wasn't something that we would tell people to do. It was what we were going to have to do for each other. And I remember driving through this downtown Columbus background with all the traffic going in early March, knowing that I was going to have to come up with some words that would make somehow tolerable the fact that we were going to look like the streets of Wuhan within 2 weeks. And what are the words? There are no training for those words. And but again, I can't say to you enough that flattening the curve was something I did. It was something we did. And I think it's a big lesson for how we can move forward in this world. So how did I end up in the crosshairs of history? I certainly was not at all thinking about this. In fact, coincidentally, I was working at the Columbus Foundation on youth homelessness and a number of other community issues, but I was also coincidentally in Leadership Columbus in that class. And I had two memories from that class. One is that we did sort of a drill. They had a 1 day long exercise that would put us in crisis under stress, and we would be in teams and we would have to figure out how to live and survive through it. And it was a contagion. It was a pandemic. And strangely enough, I'm usually a very quiet leader. I'm very egalitarian, but put a crisis in front of me, and sure enough, I was like, we're all gonna live. And I was trying to, and we did. We did, and it's a very hard exercise, but I didn't realize what foreshadowing that was. And I was also at the same time trying to talk all my class into taking all their individual projects, but making them all row in one direction. We ended up working on youth homelessness, but also they taught Brene Brown's work on vulnerability. And in my retreat, it was actually a fellow classmate who said to me, you really need to be using your life story more. Up to that point, I really didn't talk about my childhood. I'd give a little maybe allusion to it, but it was actually my leadership class that allowed me to swear in with the governor and be put in front of a camera and just say something about my childhood, which I probably would never have done before. So I hope for those of you, especially in a lot of the rich programming that you get, I think that programming I had really did help me be better and stronger in this. I did grow up in Youngstown. I was removed from a pretty rough situation at the age of 12, and really saw that some of the same kids that I'd gone to school with were, at my old school in a different zip code, were just as smart, just as caring, but our lives started to go in different trajectories. And that's when I first understood this concept, though I didn't have words for it yet, that your zip code can matter more than your genetic code. Which shouldn't be in this country and in this world at this time. I ended up going to NeoMed, Neo-UCOM, as it was called then. So Northeast Ohio all the way. It's the BSMD program. I had set my sights on being a doctor, went to Albert Einstein in the Bronx in 1990. It turned out to be the crack cocaine epidemic. So even though I had seen a lot of really awful, hard things in my life, I'd never seen it on the scale of a humanitarian crisis. That is what this pandemic is, and why it's so hard to lead typically, because we're dealing with a humanitarian crisis of such scale and scope and duration that it's just not something that typical politics can quite be trained to manage. And in that, I realized during seeing half of my kids be dead by the age of 3 from contracting AIDS in utero, that I really had to get ahead of things. I didn't want to get to trying to fix, most of what you learn in med school is sick care and fixing broken things. And I really wanted to get out ahead And that led me to a meandering way to preventive medicine and public health, a career in academics and global health, ultimately doing community work, and then getting a very strange phone call out of the blue. I would say this, another leadership thing is you just never know who you're meeting. You're living your life, you're doing your best work every day. Some days are good days, some days aren't. I happened for 1 hour to meet someone very, very close to the governor. I did not know the governor. I've not been in politics. And I got this call. Oh, the governor and I are here under the State House. We're just wondering if you'll come in and talk to us. I was so nervous. I thought, I didn't think about a job. I just thought maybe this is my chance to pitch some ideas to the governor. And he came in the room, everyone stood up, they sat down, and he proceeded to pull out this brown paper bag all crumpled and just get his lunch out. So he was very disarming. And he just said, "How did you grow up? Tell me about your childhood." And that led me to Youngstown. That led me to the story I just shared. And then I started talking about why I was so passionate about, all these different issues that affect our children, including like lead poisoning, a big issue in Cleveland. And I got so excited at one point, I do what I do talking to patients or someone, I grab them by the shoulder and I froze. And I literally said out loud, I reprimanded myself. I said, "Oh my God, don't touch the governor." And then the people sitting in the room were like, "Did she just say that?" And I did. And I remember scurrying to the elevators afterwards going, "Oh my God, they would never want to put me in front of a camera." So that is the prelude to my, career that you ultimately ended up seeing. They called back a half hour later, and it turned out the governor was very passionate about public health. Public health is not an issue. We all live 30 some years longer, but it's not at the top of people's agendas usually in politics on either party. It's not an expedient issue. We have some of the worst health outcomes in the country here in Ohio. We did gain, like I said, 30 years life expectancy, but only 5 is due to everything I learned in med school. 25 of the 30 years we gained in the last century were really due to things that we can only solve together. It was due to clean water and safe food supply and child labor laws and traffic safety and all these conditions that surround us. We definitely have to do our part. About 1/3 of what affects our health is in our control, but so much that affects us we don't realize is quietly around us. And the problem with that is when we do a good job in public health, when we knock it out of the park, you don't see it. And when you don't see it, you don't fund it. We saw that with the numbers I predicted. We did so well in Ohio in flattening the curve, we didn't see it. And therein lies the problem. But the governor knew about it because he had been doing work in Haiti when he and Fran lost their daughter in a car accident. He was in Congress working in Haiti at the time, ended up meeting a priest named Father Tom Hagen. They started building schools there. And he ultimately met Paul Farmer, a global health physician who just passed recently, one of my personal heroes. And he said, "What can I do to change this trajectory in Ohio?" So he meant it. And I have to say it was an honor of a lifetime. And in 1 year, we had amazing successes. We had the best budget we had had. We started working on lead poisoning and home visiting. We actually had an opiate settlement in Ohio where we convinced the smallest county and Cuyahoga County to come together and to agree we all needed in our communities cold hard cash. But we agreed to set aside 55% of it in an endowment so that we could live off of the interest and address addiction in perpetuity in the state. We had learned through the tobacco settlement that we ended up squandering a lot of the money of that settlement. So we learned and we did something different. And there are many, many other stories. But then one day there was this strange pneumonia, which took us on the journey together. So I can tell you, again, another funny story from behind the scenes. I was the state health officer representative for the entire Midwest. So my colleagues in other states, that put me in an unusual place in the White House, but it was also supposed to cause me to get trained in public speaking and probably what would be more the typical crisis communication spin. When we talk about crisis communication, we talk about
being clear, concise, all the C's, being credible, being consistent. And obviously we communicated in a very different way in Ohio. I was supposed to go to a training on that, but the week before, this was the fall before COVID hit, I actually had an accident. I have an old dog. I have little dog gates all through my house because of these accidents. I tripped over the dog gate, fell, broke my pelvis in several places, and I was in a walker. So I didn't get to get trained. I mean, and in some ways, again, it was another serendipitous thing because I just didn't learn or think about communicating in quite the same way. So what you saw was literally, me talking like I am talking to you now. My kids would have said, that's just mom. And, as a doctor speaks. So that was different. And to their credit, they never scripted me, which is, I think, very highly unusual. But I did figure out very early on that I felt COVID was probably already here. And as I was watching a number of things going on around the world, I was increasingly alarmed that I felt like people weren't quite telling us what was happening. So my want for brutal honesty, which is one of the three things we're going to talk about, partly was my own want for at one point I Google the word pandemic, even though I taught intro to global health for many years. I'm like, did I not know the definition of pandemic? And I think a lot of us were sort of feeling that way. But the World Health Organization hadn't yet declared that. And we had a lot of clues and a lot of adventures. We actually did a tabletop here in Ohio in early February. I was so proud of us. We did bring the whole cabinet together and did a drill as if it was the real thing. But I actually ended up in the White House the last week of February. If those of you might remember, it was right before that famous Arnold Classic decision, but it was the last week of February and the stock market had crashed for the second time in a week. And I was sitting in a room full of renowned people who I look up to, who have served multiple presidents. And the president's chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, was there. And we were going around the room and people were just saying, it was sort of like that tipping off point where everyone knew something, that it was the real thing. And everyone was giving their tips for, viral things and epidemiology things. And it got to me and everyone had sort of said everything that I would have typically said. And it all of a sudden came to me, and I don't know where the words came from, but I just said, I really feel this is the higher angels moment. We are at war with an invisible enemy. And that's what COVID was. And I so wish we had just declared it that. If it was like a Ghostbusters scene, if we could have thrown some green dye on a virus, that we could actually, again, see it, these silent victories, a silent virus, we could have pointed to a common enemy that everyone in the world had. Everyone in the world has gone through this. How rare is that we all have a shared something to pull together around? And I just said, I think this is the higher angels, Lincoln, FDR, Churchill moment. And people are looking for someone to do that. And I was really hoping that the leadership would do that. And I do remember Mick Mulvaney kind of doing this. I think he was no longer in that position 2 weeks later. And, but I remember getting back on a plane, flying back, turning right around with the governor and coming to Cleveland. And we went to Metro Health. And we were touring the infectious disease unit there. And we came out and we told Ohioans, it was the first press conference, and we just said, we made this commitment. We're going to tell you what we know as we know it. And that was the moment. And we decided 2 p.m. because that would give the press time to get, to print or on air. I thought to myself, no one's watching the Ohio News Network. So I'll try to be brave here and get out there and just keep telling people what I know as I know it. And then on the ride home, on the ride there and the ride home, we started talking about mass gatherings and the Arnold Classic and Dr. Marshika Roberts, Terry Allen, who in Cleveland, we started talking to people on the phone about mass gatherings. The mayor here was sort of like, oh my gosh, this is a $50 million revenue thing for our state. But we also knew by then that 2 people had walked in a conference at Biogen in Boston and 70 ambulances had gone out.
And so we made what was a tremendously hard decision. It was the first of many policy decisions. Every single one, hard got, every single one. Here I am on the phone, and here's that Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator voice on the other end. And that began our journey together. So we talked about, the New York Times did that analysis. So I'd like to say to you, I was picking pronouns deliberately. It wasn't quite that linguistically intelligent on my part, but we did do brutal honesty, vulnerability, and empowerment. If I could just speak to those for a moment, and then we could open it up to questions. Brutal honesty for me, as I've watched the world unfold since then, I really do believe these concepts are what we're all hungry for. We are so hungry for leaders, and the words do matter. We talk to people, and I feel that it's not always intuitive to do that, but I'm a person, and I think my childhood did this. I think my ability in a crisis comes from, I like to the chips on, the cards on the table, put the chips down. And I feel like I can solve any problem if I just know the ground I'm standing on. And then ultimately, I want to empower people to help solve it, because I could never solve it alone. And so the brutal honesty is a piece of that. And I think leaders, I do feel like we're going to have to study this pandemic. I'm begging behind the scenes for some 9/11 style commission to form. We've got to put the honest truth on what we did right and wrong, including what I did right and wrong, because until we study this and learn from it, it's the only way of doing it better the next time. And there will be, this isn't done. And so we have to stop and do that. But I think we can all of us feel like we can take the truth, but we need it. And we know that truth telling is a hard thing right now. And there are a lot of communications issues around where we get our truth, but building that trust out the gate. Vulnerability, courage is, it's not that I didn't feel fear. Another behind the scenes thing, I think I must have famously said something along the lines of, I'm not afraid, I'm determined. Coincidentally, like so many words that came to me, they came serendipitously in moments. That was something my husband had said to me that morning. My school teacher, coach husband, who says these really wise things that he says to little kids that are the ones we always forget as grownups. And it's not that I never felt fear or loss, because certainly we were inventing behind the scenes. You saw me for a little bit, but behind the scenes, we were stopping hospitals from Hunger Games of outbidding each other for PPE. People were stealing our ships at port in other countries and taking off with them. We were trying to figure out how to move a ventilator from a veterinary practice to the Cleveland Clinic. We certainly were lost in doing our best. And my goal was getting it 80%, if we could get it 80% right. And if 80% of us did the right thing, all of us would get through. And, but we felt, the fear that you feel. We all have families. We were worried about our parents. We had kids out of school. And, but the governor and I would always say, Winston Churchill's like, when you're going through hell, keep going. And that was sort of a mantra for us. And as Brene Brown says, courage comes from the root word heart, and opening your heart. And I remember asking Ohioans, I know we're sort of shutting it down, but we're really trying to open. And my goal was to get everyone, I had this vision of a life raft, and that if each and every one of us reached out and pulled someone up, that was the empowering I wanted to do, because there was no way, as I said, I could get out there and do it, or any agency could get out there and do it. We needed every neighbor to do it and help the elderly person down the street, or help watch a nurse's kid. And that's where a lot of our advice came from. But, things happen in that, I could talk forever. I know very famously, hate was something, and we knew and predicted even in 1918. I saw pictures of Cleveland with people having an anti-mask society in 1918 in Cleveland. So these things weren't unknown, that people will deal with something this disruptive in all sorts of ways. But what people don't really know is there was so much more love than hate. Again, do not want to diminish the fact that there were words like activate and liberate. And yes, I did have 24/7 state highway patrol in my driveway of a very normal house, very little house in a normal street in a normal neighborhood. and executive protection, and all of that was real. Certainly, some of the anti-Semitic things were very real. But my want, like had there not been someone with a giant gun in my front yard, I would have gone out, because so many people were hurting. They were protesting and dealing with businesses shutting and things that were real things that, you know, we wanted to hear and understand and try to attempt to deal with. But I want to tell you about the rest of it, which was the love that was going on behind the scenes. We have these giant mail rooms that are larger than the studio I'm sitting in, and you could not walk through them. You could not literally get to the mail because of the things Ohioans began to make and do and send. People dealt with this ambiguity through the arts. I said something like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon spread of disease, and there is a giant Bacon statue in Cincinnati right now in a corporate park. Like there was a story, Bonnie Bowen, a 90-year-old woman, was doing watercolors every day of a scene of the pandemic. Like she got into the 400s, and people were following that. And then she got COVID, and she's 90 some years old, and she got like 250,000 prayer messages sent to her. And you can't tell me that, again, didn't get her through, because she had purpose and meaning. And you saw there were just artwork. You know, I received things, a giant cape, an Ohio pennant flag. On the other side of the fabric is like Wonder Woman fabric. And it had my name on the back of it, like that you could wear as a cape. And people just started doing things for one another in this vein. Letters came to my house from every walk of life. It was everyone. It was Republicans and Democrats and old and young and rural. And I just started seeing over and over again that while we're not always loud or we don't have a voice, that most Ohioans were trying to row together. And that spirit, we just felt it. And that is how we flattened the curve. That's the story that went global. And I think in this moment, as we emerge, we really need to know that, again, we're gonna all emerge differently. My husband was telling his elementary school class, you know, a kid might wear a mask. We don't know that that child might be wearing a mask because they have someone at home who's immunocompromised. How are we all gonna get along? And I'd like to think that we're all growing, we're all evolving as people, but sometimes we can be like middle school or grade school again. And we're all going to have a tremendous amount of capacity. People are on edge. We've seen traffic accidents are up, rage is up in every form. And if most of us, my thing is, if enough of us do the right thing, most of the time, all of us will get through. And we don't realize, I think, how powerful we are collectively. And we know that watching what is going on in the world right now, you know, there is this unrest that was predicted by George W. Bush in this playbook is unfolding around the world. And some people have studied and think that maybe democracy is in its fourth founding now. We've been through this before as a country. And certainly the times that we most feel like we're falling apart, that disruption also unleashes a whole bunch of potential. Sometimes when the walls come down, it also makes, in the pandemic, I was able to solve things and do things that would have taken me years to do. In a crisis, and one of my guiding principles in life has been, and I've had to train myself to see this, I trained my team this way as well, that every time you hit the wall and nothing is going right, if you stay with it long enough, there's inevitably a pearl in there somewhere, something else that you had just not seen opens up. It is just, it's like a universal principle. And I really do believe we are weary, and I don't want to minimize it. And there are days that is enough for me to get out of bed and I crawl to it at the end of the day. But I do believe it's when we're most disrupted that we most have to dig deep. One woman did an act on love, not hate sign that went viral with her kids. And we started to say, act on love, not hate, act on kindness, not fear. And kindness is not niceness.
that thing you do where you pretend to be nice to people and stab them in the back. And kindness is fierce. Kindness is age-old, enduring principle of recognizing humanity in one another. And, all of us are going to have to dig deep to find it and feel it and live it right now in that deeper way. But I have great, great faith in us. I really do. So I'm going to stop there. I've said quite a bit. I'm glad to answer any questions or thoughts, hear your thoughts.
Dr. Acton, thank you so much for sharing your insights into what has happened these past few years. We'll start with, there was such, I imagine, a roller coaster of emotions and experiences over the past few years, such highs and lows. How did you manage that for yourself, and what did you rely on for strength to move through those times?
Well, it definitely was highs and lows. And I can tell you, it wasn't a lot of it. I was so in a zone and focus that I feel like I've been peeling back the layer of it still now. I'm seeing and learning. I wasn't in the grocery store to see the bare shelves. I didn't see all the news that was in print at the time. And so I think I'm still, even now, it is a war. It is a war on a common enemy, and there is trauma associated with it. And for all of the people now who've been on the front lines, whether they be a nurse, whether they work in a store, like I said, whether they be a school teacher or superintendent, all of us, none of us has been unscathed. And so for me, there are a couple odd things that happened. One is there was a distinct morning I woke up, and I would always get up at like 4 a.m. to create some quiet space. I've been trying to be more mindful, and I'm desperately going to keep trying to learn mindfulness. I'm very squirmy. So, walking and getting out in nature is I go to nature and I go to quiet, and quiet nature is a big part of and what I'm going to be working on in the future. But I remember this morning where everything that had ever, you do your career path and it isn't one thing, just like I never intended to be in this moment, but all of a sudden, everything that had gone right or wrong felt just what I needed. And that came together for that moment, but then it falls away again. And I don't know exactly what I do next or how. So even I am growing through all of this. And I just want to say that to people at home. We have to have that kindness. One of the reasons I use it is because there's so much science behind it, what it does for our own health and well-being. So a lot of times each day I wake up again and I just hope there's one thing I do that helps someone else. But I also have to remind myself to be kind. The worst stuff is inside here. And I have to remind myself about that as well. So I hope that sort of answers the journey I'm on too.
Can you share some insights into the cooperation and collaboration that happened behind the scenes? You, the governor, the lieutenant governor, always presented such a united front, but I'm sure there was a lot of discussion to get you all to that point.
Yes, I just, I can't tell you just how unprecedented a time this was. And there was this thought, I think, that while we had this playbook and we had seen some infectious diseases around the world where it had to be used in smaller or larger amounts. We actually had a big Ebola scare here in Ohio, for example, in the Kasich administration around Cleveland, around a dress shop. And we actually went into an emergency operating situation then. So there'd been close calls before, but there had never been this. I can tell you that it was 9/11. If we all can remember that time, there were about 4 days after 9/11 where everything fell away and there wasn't a stranger in the world. That feeling, and I would say this feeling lasted at least 6 weeks this time. And these governors got together, and you hear all the rhetoric out there and all the politics. There was no politics. There was a moment where it fell away. And as you can imagine, no governor wants to see their people die. And we did not know what we were facing. And And then governors that are Republican reached across the aisle to Democratic governors. And that's what we did here in the Midwest. And what you saw was that pandemic playbook unfolding and every governor like sort of inching their way forward. A lot of the scientists had gone underground. And once we started telling the truth, the best experts in the world started coming to us. So much of the knowledge I had serendipities in this. I had hired a brand new communications director 4 days before COVID hit. Turned out her brother went to my medical school, Rajiv Venkaya. He helped write the pandemic playbook for George W. Bush. I did not know this. And what is the chance of that, right? And he led me into Carter Mecker. Michael Lewis has written a book about Red Dawn. A lot more of what was going on behind the scenes is now coming into public. But we had the greatest minds in the world come to us. And that was such a tremendous help. And then, I wasn't there alone. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic because, we falsely saw this economy versus health debate going on, but that's not true at all. We're all of it. Like each of us had to worry about our health and our businesses and get our employees through. Like we're all of it. People's health and well-being is all of this. And it was wonderful to be part of a team as a leader. And I never lead alone. It's never been my nature. But, and I especially think, the honor of serving, again, all partisan, all rhetoric aside, what you saw were all of us rowing together. And I think that's what we want to see in our leaders.
How do you think your work in philanthropy has influenced your ability to be an advocate for public health?
Could you say that first part? I'm sorry if the audio went out.
Sure. How do you think your work in philanthropy has influenced your ability to be an advocate for public health?
So, philanthropy, the word itself stands for the love of humanity. And in public health, one of the biggest questions, and this is something I will say if I ever get the chance to testify about how I think we should move forward, one of the biggest questions in public health that I taught my students is who is at the table. And I believe, and I saw this with Angela Merkel, she surrounded herself with theologians, historians, military people, logistics people, social science, philanthropy. She just brought this very diverse. And I think one of the things that I would suggest that we do differently is something I really learned, but I loved about philanthropy is we're sort of Switzerland. We can be a catalyst and a convener. And that was very much my role. My role is a very quiet role of finding others and lifting them up and trying to bring them to the table around an issue. That's what we were doing in youth homelessness here in Columbus. And so philanthropy for me is sort of like a very happy place of being able to get the whole community, business and government and academics and all the nonprofits around a table. And I think that's how we solve problems. I know that's how you're solving lead poisoning in the most amazing way, how you've approached it in Cleveland. But it takes all of us coming around the table, and you need a chief health strategist or strategy that everyone again rows toward. So that's my thought.
So often we know how to train kind of that or encourage a boisterous or a more extroverted leadership. And you've made reference many times to more of that quiet leadership. What are some ways we can encourage and develop those quiet leaders?
Well, all of us are on a journey. I mean, I do see leadership very egalitarian, and you saw me, there were 1,100 people in my agency, 113 local health departments, all the other cabinet directors, all the other people. And I'm, very strengths-based person. I have these certain skills and I have these certain not as strong skills. And I was not acting alone by any means. I mean, there's so many people just around me that were amazing. And so I think part of the task is that we build ourselves to play to one another's strengths. And I am actually much more of an introvert. I can be this, but I think my very nature is a very kind of quieter self. And I feel that we don't know when we'll be called to lead. Another one of those early mornings was sort of a realization when I said that higher angels message. You know, again, I'm 56. I came of age learning about, you know, JFK and Martin Luther King and watching people, you know, lose their lives for what they believe in. And you wonder about yourself, what will I do in that moment? You hoped, you know, being Jewish, you know, I had relatives that died in the Holocaust. And, you know, my grandfather who came here, who was born in 1900, on this day, St. Patrick's Day, so I'm going to squeeze that in an ode to him. We lost a lot of family, but you always wonder, what would I do? Will I be courageous? Like, will I do the right thing? What would I do? And there are times like I can't handle what dress to buy. So, you know, but in a crisis, it's weird how it all fell away. And I just didn't want anyone to die. And I wanted everyone on that life raft, and I would have taken a bullet gladly. I would serve, I would do it 1,000,000 times over, and it did fall away. So we have to like prepare us. And that's why these leadership programs and every way we do it, though, is because each of us has those moments. They aren't on camera all the time. I would say my best work has not been on camera. It hasn't been. The work I'm most, you know, amazed by, and none of it happened alone. So
at the end of the year, beginning of this year, you started to work as part of Cleveland Mayor Bibb's health transition team. What was it like to transition from more of a state-focused role to one more specifically focused on a particular region? And what might your role be moving forward?
So it was an honor. And I got to it was a thrill because I got to come to Cleveland a bit it was like late fall. And you know, as you know, I've never been a particularly partisan person. Part of my role, I actually had a mentor who had trained me as a child advocate, you know, to be sort of a lot like philanthropy, Switzerland, so that I could help all sides. And I can tell you in every issue I've ever done, there are great people on all sides of every issue. So I was a little nervous I'm like, is this super political that I'm doing this? And people said, you know, no, when someone is transitioning, everyone in town in Cleveland gets behind them. And so it's a very exciting time for Cleveland. I'm a big believer. I was beside myself because there are certainly, you know, we all have broken parts to things that haven't been working. Public health has not been funded in the way it could be. There's so much that we need to do. But I really see Ohio and Cleveland in particular as sitting on all these pots of gold, so to speak. There are so many assets. But they need activated and they need a strategy. So one of my dreams around health is I just think one of the things the pandemic did is it broke down barriers. And your leadership there, we created this new zone structure in Ohio. And we had one, Dr. Bob Wiley actually became point person for a whole new regional way that Ohio was rowing together. And we had hospital CEOs in rooms with prisons, heads of prisons and nursing homes and health departments, and everybody was trying to help one another. And I don't want you to lose that energy. So the dream is, look, public health is not going to solve all health problems. And as much as we want to believe our healthcare system is what we all want it to be, it of course has room to grow and be more for all of us. So we need regional strategies, and we need chief health strategists with incredible communications that brings everyone to the table and brings philanthropy and government and hospitals and prison, everyone to the table to tackle the issues that you in Cleveland feel are top of mind. And that was a lot of what I was doing with the team, is kind of talking about how might we think outside the box. But I believe you're sitting, again, what's wrong with us is not nearly anything compared to what's right with us. And I believe this is a very exciting time for the region.
So we have many questions that have come in about looking forward. how do we get everyone rowing in the same direction as we transition out of the panic period and move into more of a preparing period for what comes next with COVID, especially as we hear about new variants and future pandemics?
Well, we really need to do this work. And this is me asking, every local area will have to do, we have something called a hot wash. It's typical whenever there's an incident come in, there should be a very careful study. And this will take, we already have professors in universities beginning to look deep. But we're going to need to do that at the highest levels of government and at a global level. We're going to have to do it in this country. We have to do it here in Ohio. It's really important because we're going to learn things that we need, and not just for pandemics, any other kind of overwhelming crisis that we might face, whether it be, even in tornadoes and other disasters, we need this kind of responsiveness. It's also a chance, like I said, to grow in ways. So there's so much moving forward, like one step back, 2 steps forward that we can do. We need to mourn, because I think as this recedes, the devastation of it is going to be a lot bigger than the numbers we see. We have huge amounts of unanticipated deaths, far larger than the deaths that we normally see from other diseases in a given year. So there is a lot of morbidity and mortality yet to be understood. There's living with long COVID, but there's also just mourning and grieving, having gone through such a hard time for us all. We will memorialize this eventually. I see that, and we will learn from it and educate about it. So I see us having to mark this passage of time in some way. I hope the story gets told about what we all did together, right, though. And I think the lessons are eternal lessons that humanity has dealt with before. And so we need to learn, grieve, memorialize, and then celebrate, because I don't think we are going to take things for granted. We aren't quite the same. And I think some of the other things we're seeing in the world right now, I know probably are overwhelming each and every one of us. You can't see what's happening globally without being moved and wanting to do something about it. And so I think the time to come will not be quite the same, but we are very resilient. And this is asking more of us, and we have it to give. There's no scarcity here. There are no scarcity of resources. I just refuse to see this as not win-win. When we put our minds to things, we just have to gather us to that table and think outside the box together more. So that's what I see coming. And have grace and mercy with each other as best we can, because we are all this close, myself included. And when we mess up and have a bad day, forgive yourself and start again.
Dr. Acton, it's hard to believe, but we only have time for one more question. And there are many people on the call that want to know, what is next for you? What's coming for Dr. Acton?
I can tell you that is, so everything came together, and in the pandemic, I was in my zone. And then, it's back to normal life again. And I kind of thought, I just want to go back to my old job. That was sort of how I talked myself into the job. I'm like, I'm going to be in the National Guard. I'm going to do some public service, and I'm going back, and my life will just go back to normal. And in some ways it hasn't. So I am trying to figure how I can best give back. I want to keep doing, though, the same work I've always done. As I said, I'm not a particularly partisan person. I want everyone at the table, or most people who want to come at the table around an issue. So I think what I'm going to try to do is get back to public health. I'm looking very closely at something right now that is moving my heart. And all of my choices in life have always been that way. It's just something, I have sort of a compass. I think we all have one in us that just sort of says something about this. It makes no sense at all. Sometimes it's not economical. It doesn't make any sense, but my heart I tend to take some leaps of faith, and I might do that. But my goal is, I really realize I want to be in Ohio. I I want to take whatever goodwill there has been generated and put it back to the people. I have sit on a lot of history that I'll give back someday. I'll probably write about it and teach about it. But right now, I really want to help find ways, and in whatever way I can, to help us put that goodwill back out there. So stay tuned as I figure it out. So, yeah.
Dr. Acton, thank you so very much. And thank you for your continued model of leading with vulnerability and humility. It is truly inspirational. The chat has been exploding with expressions of gratitude. People so thankful to live in Ohio and to have you as one of our leaders. You've been acknowledged as the consummate teacher practitioner for your quiet leadership as an amazing individual and leader. And I'm just going to close with the one expression: thank you for saving lives. So thank you for all that you have done with us for us for the past 2 years. We are eternally grateful.
Thank you to everyone. Be well. Be very well.